Well, their assassinations have fueled conspiracy theories for decades, those of former President John F. Kennedy, his brother, Senator Robert F. Kennedy, and civil rights icon Martin Luther King. Well, insisting that, quote, the families and American people deserve transparency and truth, Donald Trump has signed an executive order ordering the release of thousands of classified government documents about those assassinations. For more on all of Donald Trump's actions in these first several days in office, SUNY Distinguished Professor Ian Reifowitz joins us on the program now. Thank you very much for joining us, Professor.
Thank you.
So Donald Trump has been in office then for just under a week. What do you make of his first actions as president? Are they along the lines of what you expected? Are there any major surprises for you?
I wouldn't say there are major surprises, with one possible exception. The president, or at least Vice President J.D. Vance, and a number of Republicans before Trump took office stated clearly that although the president was planning to pardon a good number of the January 6th insurrectionists, that those who committed violent acts would not be pardoned. That restriction went by the wayside. Trump pardoned everybody, or commuted the sentences of everybody. And that includes some 600 rioters who were convicted of violent acts. There were 10 who were convicted of sedition against the United States. You had 140 officers wounded. You had one officer, Brian Sicknick, who died. All of the people involved were either sent home from jail and or had their sentences pardoned. So that was one thing that surprised me, in particular because it opens up President Trump to the charge of being anti-police. Police officers across the country, not just those who were involved in the January 6th insurrection, were shocked by this. But I think for Trump, if you take the executive orders as a whole, it's really about him wanting to show domination, his absolute and utter domination of the American political scene. He believes that he needs to show he can do whatever he wants, and that is how he's going to cow his opponents.
On that note, Professor, I think a lot of people who voted for Donald Trump thought a lot of his campaign promises were just rhetoric. It's only been a few days, but these few days have certainly set the tone for his presidency, not only his actions on immigration, but like you said, the pardoning of those violent rioters from January 6th. Do you think that the vast majority of his supporters will approve of such radical steps?
No, I don't think the vast majority of them will approve of everything. I think most of his supporters are on board with him on immigration, on his actions on the border, and that's probably the issue. Other than reaction against inflation and economic issues, that's immigration is probably the issue motivating his supporters, especially his core supporters, most strongly. I don't think he did anything there that was unexpected, that his supporters did not expect. He talked about trying to get rid of birthright citizenship, going over the 14th Amendment. As we noted already, there's been that attempt has been blocked by a judge. I don't think there's any question that that was performative. But again, for Trump, it's about performance is real for him, because performance is how you show domination. I don't care that the 14th Amendment to the Constitution says that a person born here is a citizen. I'm going to say that that's not the case. And that way, it's win-win for him. Even though he's going to lose in the courts, he can go to his core supporters, even though he's not running for re-election, he can go to his core supporters and say, listen, I'm fighting for what you and I believe is really important, and the enemies are all over, including in the Supreme Court.
He takes office, sir, as a quite powerful president. He's got Congress, much of Congress support. He's got the Supreme Court as well. So do you think that he will really face that many legal hurdles, if you will, to some of the more radical elements of his policy proposals?
Well, some of them will be blocked by the courts, and even this Supreme Court may have its limits. On the 14th Amendment, if the Supreme Court decides that the 14th Amendment doesn't read the way it clearly reads, I think it will lose even more of its credibility. In terms of his legislative agenda, he's got a very narrow House majority. He can only afford to lose a couple of votes on any given policy. It looks like his intent is to combine basically all of the things he wants to do that have anything to do with budgetary matters or spending. So that includes his proposals to either cut or extend tax cuts, mostly for wealthy Americans, as well as his proposals on the border, and just about anything else that involves spending, into one large bill, which is known as a reconciliation bill. So even though there is a filibuster in the Senate, which would normally require 60 votes. On a reconciliation bill, it gives the majority party sort of one bite at the apple to avoid a filibuster. So if he can get everything he wants into one reconciliation bill, and they can do that, I believe, once a year, then he can get everything through as long as he holds his narrow House majority together. But yes, that's the question. Will even some of these Republicans, will any of these Republicans, or more than one or two, stand up and say, we don't want this? In 2017, he was unable to get Obamacare repealed because there were 3 senators, 2 of whom, Murkowski and Collins, are still in the Senate, who said no. And then there was John McCain, who gave his famous thumbs down. We'll have to see if there's anybody willing to do that, or enough people willing to do that this time around.
I do want to piggyback off of that idea in 1 second. But before that, I'd like to ask you, because his immigration policies were, of course, to be expected. But I think one thing that has been a bit of a surprise is the cracks that his immigration policies in particular have brought out within the MAGA movement, at least the suggestion of cracks, especially between people like Stephen Miller, Steve Bannon, and then Donald Trump's new Silicon Valley allies like Elon Musk and Peter Thiel. Do you think that we're witnessing the end of the honeymoon phase between these two distinct groups of Donald Trump's allies?
There's a real division there because one group, the Silicon Valley types, want to make money. That's really all they care about in terms of what policies they support. So they want the H-1B visas because they want to be able to bring in IT workers, technology workers from other countries. Steve Bannon and the economic nationalists couldn't care less if Silicon Valley makes money. They have a broader opposition to immigration. They claim to be on the side of Americans first. So they look at the H-1B visas as bringing in, quote unquote foreigners to take American jobs. At the end of the day, there are contradictions within the Trump movement between those who are more libertarian, let's say, more focused on creating more wealth for themselves and for the wealthy, which is really where Trump comes down, which is why Trump spoke in favor of the H-1B visas, and these more economic nationalists who see immigration from a more ideological perspective. I do think there's a potential for a crack there. Bannon's basically condemned Musk pretty harshly in the last few days. And Bannon ended up last time going from being a key White House figure, running the campaign, running the political operation in the White House for the first few months, to being out. He's now a supporter of Trump, but he doesn't have sway in the Trump White House. At the end of the day, I think it's pretty clear that President Trump will side with the interests of the wealthiest over these populists. As
a final question for you, sir, we just have a bit of time left. You mentioned how things were a bit different when Trump first was inaugurated in 2017. We saw mass protests. There was frequent talk of resistance. There was criticism from industry leaders, including in Silicon Valley. That's all much different now, much more absent, I think you could say. Do you think that the resistance to Donald Trump then is dead?
I think it's a tactical change. Here, at the end of the day, what we have to recognize is that Donald Trump does not support from the American people. He enters office, average of approval rating of minus 1.5. 1.5% more people disapprove of him than approve. That's lower than the approval rating he had entering office in 2016. It's much lower than the approval rating Biden and Obama, for example, began their terms with. They were at plus 25. There's not a great groundswell of support for these policies. So the question is, will there be enough opposition that members of Congress, Republican members of Congress, will vote no on enough of these things that they won't pass? Because that's really what matters when it comes to policy. Executive orders don't change anywhere near the amount of U.S. policy than changing laws does.
Professor Ian Reifowitz, thank you so very much for coming on the show today.